The spring of 1875 brought unprecedented change to the windswept plains of West Texas, where the boundaries between white settlements and Comanche territory had blurred into an uneasy peace. At the center of this delicate balance stood Chief Running Bear, a man whose reputation for wisdom and strength had earned respect from both his own people and the growing number of settlers who sought to make their homes in his ancestral lands. The chief's unexpected announcement in early March had sent shockwaves through trading posts, frontier towns, and tribal councils alike. He would choose a wife through a great gathering, open to women from all backgrounds who wished to join their lives with his. The proclamation, delivered through interpreters at Fort Griffin and repeated in newspapers throughout Texas, specified only that interested women should come to the sacred grounds near the Brazos River on the first full moon of summer. What Running Bear hadn't anticipated was the overwhelming response to his invitation. By late May, an enormous tent city had sprouted along the riverbanks, housing nearly 2,000 women who'd traveled from across the continent for this unprecedented opportunity. The gathering included everything from refined Eastern ladies seeking adventure to desperate widows hoping for security, from curious frontier women to those fleeing troubled pasts. The sight was unlike anything the frontier had ever witnessed. Elaborate pavilions housing wealthy women from Dallas and San Antonio stood alongside simple canvas shelters of farm wives and saloon girls. The air buzzed with multiple languages as women from Mexican territories mingled with German immigrants, freed slaves, and even a few adventurous souls who'd journeyed from as far as California and New York. "Chief," said Grey Wolf, Running Bear's longtime friend and advisor, surveying the sprawling encampment with barely concealed amazement, "when you announced this gathering, I thought perhaps 50 women might come. This is like watching all the butterflies in Texas converge on a single flower." Running Bear stood atop a low hill overlooking the camp, his weathered face impassive as he observed the spectacle below. At 32, he was considered young for a chief, but the early death of his father and his own proven leadership during the difficult transition to reservation life had elevated him to his position. His decision to seek a wife through this unconventional method had been born of practical necessity rather than romantic whimsy. "The old ways of marriage arrangement no longer serve our people," he replied thoughtfully. "We live between two worlds now, Grey Wolf. Perhaps my wife should also come from that space between worlds." The most striking aspect of the gathering was the elaborate preparation ritual that had emerged among the assembled women. Word had spread through the camp that Comanche men valued certain types of face painting and adornment, leading to an explosion of colorful decorations that transformed the riverbank into a rainbow of competing beauty displays. Women who'd never worn more than simple powder in their lives now sported intricate designs in red, yellow, and black paint. Trading posts for 100 miles had been cleaned out of ribbons, beads, and feathers as the assembled hopefuls tried to outdo each other in catching the chief's eye. The more elaborate the decoration, the thinking went, the more likely a woman was to be noticed among such overwhelming competition. Rebecca Martinez, a widow from San Antonio, had spent the morning applying an elaborate pattern of red and yellow stripes across her cheeks, following instructions from a woman who claimed to have lived among the Cherokee. "Chief Running Bear is said to be particularly drawn to bold displays of color," she explained to her tent neighbor, while adding more feathers to her hair. "A woman must stand out if she hopes to be chosen from so many." Similar conversations echoed throughout the camp as women shared rumors, theories, and supposed insider knowledge about Comanche courtship customs. Most of these traditions were pure invention, created by imaginative minds trying to gain advantage in an unprecedented situation, but they spread through the gathering like wildfire. The economic impact of the gathering had transformed the entire region. Entrepreneurs had flocked to the area, setting up temporary businesses to serve the enormous crowd. Food vendors, clothing merchants, and even a traveling photographer had established operations to capitalize on this unique event. "I've never seen anything like it," marveled Captain James Morrison of the nearby cavalry post, watching the controlled chaos through his field glasses. "It's like a county fair, a military encampment, and a revival meeting all rolled into one." But amid all the preparation and spectacle, one woman remained notably apart from the frenzied painting and decorating that consumed the rest of the camp. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Stood Apart. Emma Clark sat quietly beside her modest wagon at the very edge of the great encampment, her presence so understated that most of the other women had scarcely noticed her arrival 3 days earlier. Unlike the elaborate tents and colorful displays that dominated the gathering, Emma's simple canvas shelter and unadorned appearance marked her as either supremely confident or completely naive about the competition she faced. At 25, Emma possessed the kind of quiet beauty that revealed itself slowly: clear grey eyes that missed nothing, auburn hair that caught the light when she moved, and a calm demeanor that suggested depths most people never bothered to explore. Her simple blue dress, while clean and well-mended, couldn't compete with the elaborate costumes and painted faces that surrounded her, nor did she seem inclined to try. "Honey, you can't seriously be planning to meet the chief looking like that," said Dolores Murphy, a saloon owner from Abilene who'd positioned her tent nearby and taken it upon herself to educate Emma about proper preparation. "Look around you. Every woman here is painted up like a war party. You'll disappear into the background without some kind of decoration." Emma looked up from the letter she was writing to her sister back in Missouri, her expression politely interested but unchanged. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Murphy, but I've never been one for paint and feathers. If Chief Running Bear is looking for someone genuine, perhaps that's more likely to come from being myself rather than trying to become someone else." Dolores shook her head in exasperation, her own face elaborately decorated with what she believed to be authentic Comanche war paint patterns. "Sweetie, there are 2,000 women here, most of them prettier and richer than either of us. This isn't the time for modesty, it's the time for making an impression." But Emma had already returned her attention to her letter, effectively ending the conversation. She'd made the journey from Missouri not out of desperation or adventure-seeking, but from a carefully considered decision that her family still didn't understand. Her late husband's debts had left her with few options, but rather than accepting charity from relatives or entering into a marriage of convenience with one of the local farmers who'd shown interest, she'd chosen to take control of her own destiny. The stories she'd heard about Chief Running Bear had intrigued her, not the romanticized tales of noble savages that filled dime novels, but the practical accounts from traders and Indian agents who described a man trying to lead his people through an impossible transition. The Comanche way of life was ending, and their survival depended on leaders wise enough to navigate between maintaining their identity and adapting to new realities. Emma understood something about impossible transitions. She'd spent the last 3 years managing her late husband's failing farm while caring for his elderly mother and dealing with creditors who showed no mercy for a young widow's circumstances. The experience had taught her that survival often required making difficult choices that others couldn't understand. "Miss Clark," called a voice from behind her wagon, causing Emma to look up in surprise. A young Comanche man approached with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to respect, though his mixture of traditional and white clothing suggested the cultural balancing act that defined life for his people. "I am Swift Arrow, interpreter for Chief Running Bear," he said in careful English. "The chief has asked me to speak with some of the women before the formal gathering begins. Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" Emma set aside her letter and stood, smoothing her simple skirt. "Of course, though I'm not sure what I could tell him that would be different from what he's heard from the others." Swift Arrow's eyes noted her unpainted face and unadorned hair with apparent interest. "The chief is curious about women who choose not to follow the crowd. He asks, why did you come to this gathering, and what do you hope to gain from marriage to a Comanche leader?" The directness of the question caught Emma off guard, but she appreciated the honesty behind it. Most of the women she'd overheard talking about the chief spoke in terms of romance and adventure, as if marriage to him would be some kind of exotic fairy tale rather than a partnership between two people facing complex challenges. "I came because I believe Chief Running Bear is looking for a partner who can help him build a bridge between two worlds," Emma replied thoughtfully. "The old ways are ending, but that doesn't mean everything valuable about them must be lost. I think I could be useful in that work." "And what makes you believe you could be useful in such work?" Emma considered the question seriously, aware that her answer would likely determine whether she ever had a chance to meet the chief himself. "I've spent my life managing transitions, Mr. Swift Arrow. When my husband died, I had to learn how to run a farm, negotiate with banks, and care for family members who couldn't care for themselves. I've learned that successful change requires honoring what came before while adapting to new realities." Swift Arrow nodded slowly, his expression revealing nothing of what he thought about her response. The chief will be interested in your perspective, Miss Clark. He has grown weary of women who see him as either a romantic fantasy or a path to wealth and status. As the interpreter moved on to question other women, Emma returned to her letter with a thoughtful expression. She'd made the journey to Texas with realistic expectations and practical goals, but something about Swift Arrow's questions suggested that Chief Running Bear might be more complex and thoughtful than even she had anticipated. Around her, the great gathering continued its elaborate preparations, but Emma remained focused on simply being herself, a decision that would soon prove more revolutionary than all the paint and feathers in Texas. Chapter 3. The Test of Character. The morning of the first formal gathering dawned clear and bright, with the Texas sun casting long shadows across the encampment as nearly 2,000 women prepared for their opportunity to meet Chief Running Bear. The air hummed with nervous energy as final touches were applied to elaborate face paintings. Feathers were adjusted in carefully arranged hair, and colorful dresses were smoothed for the 100th time. Chief Running Bear sat in council with his advisors beneath a large oak tree that had served as a meeting place for generations of his people. The weight of choosing a life partner from such an overwhelming number of candidates pressed heavily on his shoulders, made more complex by the cultural implications of his decision. Whatever choice he made would send a message about the future direction of his people's relationship with the changing world around them. "The elders are concerned," Grey Wolf said quietly, gesturing toward a group of older Comanche men who watched the proceedings with barely concealed disapproval. "They fear that choosing a white woman will encourage our young people to abandon our traditions entirely. And the Indian agent believes I should choose someone who will help our people assimilate more quickly into white society," Running Bear replied, his weathered hands clasped before him. "Everyone has advice about what my marriage should accomplish for others. What about what it should accomplish for me?" Swift Arrow approached the council circle with the measured steps of someone bearing important information. "Chief, I have completed my conversations with the women you requested. Their responses were illuminating." Over the past 3 days, Swift Arrow had conducted informal interviews with dozens of women throughout the camp, following Running Bear's instructions to gauge their motivations and character beyond the surface presentations they offered. The results had been both predictable and surprising. "Many speak of love at first sight, though they have never met you," Swift Arrow reported. "Others are quite honest about seeking security and status. Few seem genuinely interested in learning about our culture, though most have romantic notions rather than realistic understanding. And the woman who refuses to paint her face, Emma Clark, she is different, Chief. She speaks of partnership and building bridges between worlds. When I asked what she could offer, she didn't mention her beauty or domestic skills. She talked about managing difficult transitions and honoring the past while adapting to change." Running Bear's interest was clearly piqued. In a gathering dominated by women trying to transform themselves into what they thought he wanted, someone who remained steadfastly herself represented an intriguing anomaly. The formal presentations began at midday, with women called forward in groups of 20 to introduce themselves before the assembled tribal council. The variety was staggering. Elegant ladies from eastern cities speaking in cultured tones about their accomplishments, frontier women emphasizing their practical skills, and everything in between. Margaret Blackwood, daughter of a wealthy Dallas merchant, swept forward in an elaborate doe-skin dress decorated with hundreds of beads and feathers. Her face bore an intricate pattern of red and black paint that she'd paid a traveling artist $20 to apply. "Chief Running Bear," she announced in ringing tones, "I offer you a union that would bring prosperity and important connections to your people." Similar presentations followed throughout the afternoon, each woman trying to distinguish herself through increasingly elaborate displays. Sarah Mitchell demonstrated her skill with horses, performing riding tricks that drew admiring gasps from the crowd. Isabella Rodriguez sang traditional Mexican songs while performing intricate dances. Catherine O'Brien recited poetry about the noble savage and the romance of frontier life. By late afternoon, the presentations had begun to blur together in Running Bear's mind. A kaleidoscope of painted faces, elaborate costumes, and rehearsed performances that revealed little about the actual character of the women involved. He found himself growing increasingly weary of the spectacle, wondering if his unconventional approach to finding a wife had instead created an impossible circus. "Chief," Swift Arrow murmured during a brief break between presentations. "The woman Emma Clark is in the final group. She still has not painted her face or changed her appearance in any way." When Emma's group was finally called forward, the contrast was immediately apparent. 19 women arrayed in colorful splendor stood alongside one woman in a simple blue dress whose only decoration was a small silver locket at her throat. The other women in her group seemed to unconsciously distance themselves from Emma, as if her plainness might somehow diminish their own elaborate presentations. "Miss Emma Clark of Missouri," the tribal herald announced, and Emma stepped forward with quiet dignity. She didn't curtsy or perform any special gestures. Instead, she looked directly at Chief Running Bear with steady gray eyes and spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Chief Running Bear, I'm honored to meet you. I've come not to perform or impress, but to offer you an honest partnership if you believe we might build something meaningful together." "Tell me," Running Bear said, speaking directly to her for the first time, "why do you not paint your face when all the others do?" Emma's response was characteristically direct. "Because I don't know what your preferences are, and I thought it would be dishonest to pretend to be something I'm not in order to win your approval. If you're looking for a partner, shouldn't that partnership be based on truth rather than performance?" A murmur rippled through the watching crowd, part surprise at her boldness, part disapproval of what seemed like disrespect for the elaborate efforts others had made. But Running Bear found himself genuinely intrigued by her approach. "And what truth do you offer me, Emma Clark?" "I offer you someone who understands that marriage is work, not romance. Someone who's learned to find solutions, rather than simply hoping problems will disappear. I can't promise to be the most beautiful or entertaining woman here, but I can promise to be honest, loyal, and committed to whatever we build together." As Emma returned to her place among the other women, Running Bear felt something he hadn't experienced during any of the previous presentations: genuine curiosity about getting to know her better. In a gathering designed to showcase each woman's best qualities, she had instead chosen to reveal her authentic self, and that authenticity had accomplished what all the paint and performance could not. The day's presentations concluded with the sun setting over the vast encampment, but Running Bear's thoughts kept returning to the woman who had dared to stand before him without disguise or pretense, offering truth instead of spectacle. Chapter 4. The Choice That Changed Everything. The final day of the great gathering arrived with an autumn crispness that seemed to sharpen everyone's awareness that decisions could no longer be delayed. Chief Running Bear had spent the previous evening in solitude, walking the riverbank and considering not just which woman to choose, but what that choice would mean for his people's future and his own happiness. As dawn broke over the encampment, the air buzzed with speculation and final preparations. Word had spread that the chief would announce his decision at sunset, and the tension among the assembled women was almost palpable. Some packed their belongings with resignation, sensing that their chances had passed. Others made last-minute attempts to catch his attention, sending gifts or messages through intermediaries. Emma Clark spent the morning much as she had every other day, quietly tending to her simple camp, writing letters, and observing the controlled chaos around her with calm detachment. She'd made peace with whatever decision came, understanding that she'd presented herself honestly and could do no more than that. "You're mighty calm for someone who might be chosen as a chief's wife today," observed Mary Patterson, a schoolteacher from Kansas who'd become one of the few women to seek out Emma's company during the gathering. "Or might not be chosen," Emma replied with a slight smile. "I've learned that you can't control other people's decisions, Mary. You can only control how honestly you present yourself and how gracefully you accept the results." Meanwhile, Chief Running Bear met with his council for the final time before making his announcement. The political implications of his choice weighed heavily on everyone present, with different factions advocating for different types of selection. "Choose the merchant's daughter from Dallas," urged White Eagle, one of the more progressive council members. "Her father's connections could bring prosperity and protection to our people." "The frontier women understand hardship better," countered Grey Wolf. "Someone like the rancher's daughter from Colorado would adapt more easily to our way of life." "And what of love?" asked Swift Arrow quietly. "Should not the chief's happiness be considered alongside political advantages?" Running Bear had been wrestling with exactly that question. His position required him to think of his people's welfare, but he was also a man seeking a life partner. The elaborate presentations and painted faces had left him feeling more isolated than before, surrounded by people who saw him as a symbol rather than a person. "I have made my decision," he announced finally. "But first, I want to meet privately with 3 women who have interested me most. Swift Arrow, please ask Emma Clark, Sarah Mitchell, and Catherine Reynolds to join me for individual conversations this afternoon." The news that Emma had been selected as one of 3 finalists sent shockwaves through the camp. Many women who had dismissed her as naive or foolish suddenly looked at her with new interest, trying to understand what the chief had seen in someone so unremarkable. "I don't understand it," muttered Rebecca Martinez, touching her own elaborate face paint self-consciously. "What could he possibly see in her? She hasn't even tried to make herself attractive." But Emma's selection made perfect sense to those who had taken the time to really observe her during the gathering. While others had focused on external displays, she had demonstrated the kind of steady character that suggested she would be a reliable partner through whatever challenges the future might bring. The individual meetings took place in a neutral lodge that had been erected specifically for private conversations. Sarah Mitchell, the rancher's daughter, spoke passionately about her love of horses and her experience managing cattle operations. Catherine Reynolds, a widow from Chicago, emphasized her education and her ability to help bridge cultural differences. When Emma's turn came, she entered the lodge with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout the gathering. Chief Running Bear studied her carefully, noting again how her unpainted face allowed her natural expressions to show clearly. "Emma Clark," he said in English, which he spoke more fluently than most people realized, "you have surprised many people by remaining yourself, while others try to become what they think I want. Tell me, what do you think I want in a wife?" Emma considered the question seriously before responding. "I think you want what most people want in a marriage partner. Someone who will stand beside you during difficult times, who will tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear, and who will work with you to build something larger than either of you could create alone. The specific details of what that looks like probably matter less than whether 2 people are genuinely committed to the partnership. And are you committed to such a partnership with someone you barely know? I'm committed to trying to build one, if you believe we're compatible enough to make the attempt worthwhile. I won't pretend to love you. We don't know each other well enough for that yet. But I can promise to approach our marriage with honesty, respect, and the intention of making it work." Her straightforward answer impressed Running Bear more than all the passionate declarations of love he'd heard from other women. Here was someone who understood that successful marriages were built on foundation stones, more solid than romantic feeling. As the sun began to set, the entire camp gathered for the chief's announcement. The 3 finalists sat in places of honor, each woman maintaining her composure despite the enormous stakes involved. The crowd of assembled women, tribal members, soldiers, and curious onlookers created an atmosphere of barely contained anticipation. Chief Running Bear stood before the gathering, with the bearing of a man who had made a difficult decision and found peace with it. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the silent crowd. 4 days ago, I announced my intention to choose a wife from among the women who answered my call. I have been honored by the courage and determination of every woman who made this journey. Each of you deserves happiness and respect, and I wish that for all of you." He paused, his eyes moving across the sea of painted faces and elaborate costumes, before settling on the one woman who had remained unadorned throughout the gathering. "I have chosen to ask Emma Clark of Missouri to become my wife, if she will have me." The announcement hit the crowd like thunder. Gasps echoed across the gathering, followed by stunned silence, as 2,000 women absorbed the reality that the chief had chosen the one woman who had made no effort to transform herself for his approval. Emma herself seemed momentarily stunned, her grey eyes wide with surprise despite her earlier composure. She had hoped but hadn't dared to expect such an outcome. "Emma Clark," Running Bear continued, approaching her with formal courtesy, "will you accept my proposal of marriage?" Emma stood slowly, her simple blue dress making her seem almost ethereal in the gathering twilight. For a moment that felt like eternity. She studied the man before her, weathered hands that spoke of honest work, eyes that held both strength and kindness, a face marked by responsibility and wisdom. "Chief Running Bear," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the gathering, "I accept your proposal, with gratitude for your trust and commitment to building a true partnership together." As the crowd erupted in a mixture of applause, disappointment, and amazement, Emma Clark, The woman who had dared to remain herself in a gathering of 2,000 competitors stepped forward to begin a new chapter that would challenge everything both cultures thought they knew about love, marriage, and the courage required to bridge two worlds. Chapter 5. Two Worlds United. Final chapter. 3 years had passed since the legendary gathering at Brazos River, and the autumn of 1878 found Emma Running Bear standing on the porch of the remarkable home she and her husband had built together, a structure that embodied their successful blending of two cultures. The house featured traditional log construction familiar to frontier settlers, but incorporated Comanche design elements, like the large central room for community gatherings and the carefully positioned windows that honored the 4 sacred directions. Emma, now 28, had grown into her role as the chief's wife with the same quiet determination she'd shown throughout the selection process. Her auburn hair, streaked with early silver from the responsibilities of leadership, was braided in the traditional Comanche style, but adorned with a simple silver comb that had been her grandmother's. She wore a dress of her own design, practical blue cotton cut in frontier fashion, but decorated with intricate beadwork that told the story of her adoption into the tribe. Mama Emma, called 8-year-old Joseph White Feather, running toward the house with the boundless energy of childhood. The boy was one of 3 orphaned children that Emma and Running Bear had taken into their family, creating a household that reflected their commitment to bridging cultural divides. Papa says the delegation from Washington will be here soon, and you should prepare for the feast. Emma smiled at the child who had learned to navigate effortlessly between English and Comanche, between frontier games and tribal traditions. Tell your father I'll be ready. And Joseph, remember to use your best manners when the officials arrive. You're representing both your peoples today. The delegation's visit represented the culmination of 3 years of careful diplomacy that had established Running Bear's reservation as a model for peaceful coexistence. Unlike other areas where tensions remained high between Native Americans and white settlers, the territory under Running Bear's leadership had become known for prosperity, cooperation, and innovative solutions to cultural conflicts. Much of this success stemmed from Emma's unique role as cultural interpreter and mediator. Her position as a white woman who had genuinely joined Comanche society rather than trying to change it gave her credibility with both communities. She had learned the language, customs, and spiritual practices of her adopted people, while maintaining her own identity and connections to frontier society. "Mrs. Running Bear," called Clara Morrison, approaching the house with the confidence of long friendship. Clara was one of several women from the original gathering who had remained in the area, finding their own paths to happiness rather than returning home in defeat. "The Ladies' Cultural Society meeting is tomorrow, and we still need to finalize the plans for the new school." The school represented one of Emma's most ambitious projects, an institution where both white and Comanche children could learn together, studying traditional academic subjects alongside cultural knowledge from both societies. The idea had initially faced resistance from both communities, but Emma's patient advocacy and practical demonstrations had gradually won support. "I'll be there," Emma assured her friend. "Have you heard anything more from the Education Department about the federal funding?" "Promising news, actually. Your husband's reputation in Washington has opened doors that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Indeed, Chief Running Bear had become something of a phenomenon in government circles, a Native American leader who had successfully guided his people through the transition to reservation life while maintaining cultural integrity and achieving genuine prosperity. His marriage to Emma had initially been viewed with suspicion by officials who worried about a white woman gaining influence in tribal affairs, but her obvious commitment to her adopted community had gradually won respect. As afternoon progressed, the delegation from Washington arrived in a cloud of dust and ceremony. Emma stood beside her husband to greet the officials, her presence serving as a living symbol of the cultural bridge they had built together. Senator James Crawford, chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, emerged from the lead carriage with the bearing of a man expecting to be impressed. "Chief Running Bear, Mrs. Running Bear," the senator said with formal courtesy. "We've heard remarkable reports about your community's progress. The president himself is interested in understanding how your model might be applied elsewhere." The tour that followed showcased 3 years of careful development and innovation. The reservation featured prosperous farms using both traditional and modern agricultural techniques, a thriving trading post that benefited both native and white merchants, and social institutions that served the entire regional community rather than maintaining strict racial divisions. "Extraordinary," murmured Dr. Henry Phillips, the delegation's education specialist, as they visited the integrated school where Comanche children learned, alongside the sons and daughters of local ranchers and farmers. "I've never seen such successful cultural integration. How did you overcome the resistance that has plagued similar efforts elsewhere?" "By starting with genuine respect," Emma replied thoughtfully. "Too many integration efforts begin with the assumption that one culture must change to accommodate the other. We began with the idea that both cultures had valuable contributions to make, and that our children would be stronger for learning from both traditions." The evening feast provided an opportunity for more informal conversation, as delegation members mingled with tribal leaders, local settlers, and the remarkable extended family that Emma and Running Bear had created. Their household included not only adopted children from both cultures, but also elderly tribal members who served as cultural teachers, and young white women who had come to learn frontier skills. "Mrs. Running Bear," Senator Crawford said during the meal, "I must ask, do you ever regret your decision to leave your former life? Surely there are aspects of white society that you miss." Emma considered the question while watching her husband translate a joke between a Comanche elder and a visiting rancher, both men laughing at the cultural misunderstanding that had become a source of amusement rather than conflict. "Senator, I think you're asking the wrong question," she replied with the directness that had characterized her from the beginning. "I didn't leave my former life. I expanded it. I'm still the same person who traveled here from Missouri, but I've become more than I ever could have been if I'd remained in a single cultural world." "And your husband? Has he made similar adaptations?" Emma glanced at Running Bear, who was now showing one of the younger officials how to properly hold a ceremonial pipe. "We've both changed, Senator, but we've changed together. That's what real partnership means, growing in ways that make you stronger individually, while building something larger than either person could create alone." As the evening progressed, the delegation members found themselves drawn into conversations and activities that broke down their preconceptions about reservation life. By the time they retired for the night, several officials were already discussing how elements of the Running Bear model might be implemented in other regions. Later, as Emma and Running Bear walked alone under the vast Texas sky, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The woman who had sat quietly beside her wagon 3 years ago, expecting nothing and hoping for little, had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures came from simply being authentic enough to attract the right partner. "Do you think they understand what we've really accomplished here?" Running Bear asked, gesturing toward the guest quarters where the delegation slept. "They understand that it works," Emma replied. "Whether they understand why it works, that might take longer. Change happens slowly, especially when it challenges people's fundamental assumptions about how different groups should relate to each other." "And are you satisfied with slow change?" Emma smiled, taking her husband's hand as they continued their walk. "I've learned to appreciate lasting change over dramatic change. What we've built here will outlive both of us because it's based on genuine respect and mutual benefit rather than political expediency." The story that had begun with a desperate announcement and shocked the frontier with its conclusion had become something simpler and more profound. A love story written not in grand gestures and cultural conquest, but in the daily choice to honor both traditions while building a future worthy of the trust two communities had placed in their unlikely partnership. As the stars emerged over Texas, Emma Running Bear, the woman who had dared to remain herself in a gathering of 2,000 competitors, stood as proof that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to pretend to be something you're not, and finding a partner wise enough to value authenticity over performance. Their story would be told for generations, not as a tale of exotic romance between different worlds, but as a practical demonstration that genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared commitment, could overcome even the deepest cultural divisions. The gathering at Brazos River had ended with one marriage, but it had begun a transformation that would touch countless lives across the American frontier.